Did you know that 85% of people who experience clinical death report the same 7 stages? A pattern so consistent across cultures and religions that governments have quietly funded research for decades. What do they know that we don't? The concealed truth. They appear in ancient manuscripts. They're whispered in monastery corridors. They're documented in classified military files. 7 distinct levels of consciousness after physical death. A roadmap of the afterlife that has been systematically hidden from public knowledge. I'm talking about near-death experiences, NDEs, but not the sanitized version you've heard before. For centuries, religious institutions controlled this narrative, calling it divine revelation or forbidden knowledge. Science dismissed it as hallucination. Both were wrong. Both were hiding something. Today, we'll explore what happens when the heart stops beating and the brain shows no activity, yet consciousness expands. Not through speculation, but through thousands of documented cases spanning continents and centuries, pointing to the same truth. Death is not an end, but a threshold to something far more profound. The Great Suppression. The greatest obstacle to understanding near-death experiences isn't lack of evidence. It's our collective fear of confronting what they reveal about reality. Modern medicine calls NDEs hallucinations, dying brain cells creating comforting illusions. Convenient explanation. Too convenient. It doesn't account for verified cases where clinically dead patients accurately report conversations happening in other rooms of the hospital, or describe surgical instruments they couldn't possibly have seen, or relay information about distant relatives that proves correct. The scientific establishment has maintained a curious double standard, demanding rigorous evidence while simultaneously refusing to examine the evidence that exists. Why? Because accepting the reality of NDEs would collapse fundamental assumptions about consciousness being merely a product of brain activity. Religious institutions have their own reasons for controlling this narrative. Most theological frameworks position themselves as gatekeepers to the afterlife. What happens when people return with first-hand experience that contradicts official doctrine? What happens when the message they bring back is that spirituality transcends religious boundaries? Both science and religion face the same challenge. NDEs suggest consciousness exists independent of the physical brain, a finding with implications too disruptive to acknowledge openly. Then there's cultural dismissal. We've constructed a society that pathologizes spiritual experiences. Tell someone you've communicated with deceased relatives during a near-death episode, and they'll likely recommend psychiatric evaluation. Yet cross-cultural analysis reveals striking similarities in NDE accounts across vastly different belief systems, from atheists in Stockholm to Buddhist monks in Tibet to indigenous shamans in the Amazon. Perhaps most troubling is the deliberate suppression of research. Multiple scientists who began studying NDEs have reported funding suddenly withdrawn, papers rejected without explanation, and careers mysteriously stalled. One prominent neurologist described being warned by colleagues, "This is career suicide." Why would understanding what happens after death pose such a threat? What knowledge could be so dangerous that multiple institutions would work to suppress it? The answer lies in what NDEs reveal about the nature of reality itself. The 7 thresholds. Let's examine what those who've crossed the threshold consistently report, focusing on patterns that emerge across thousands of cases. The first level is what researchers call the transition. Most experience floating above their physical body, watching medical personnel working to revive them. Many report perfect recall of conversations, procedures, and events occurring while they were clinically dead. Details later verified by medical staff. Dr. Sam Parnia's AWARE study documented dozens of such cases, including one where a patient accurately described a shoe on a hospital ledge that was impossible to see from inside the building. This raises the first profound question. If consciousness is generated by the brain, how can perception continue when the brain shows no activity? The second level involves what experiencers describe as a life review, but not the simplified flashback portrayed in movies. This is a complete re-experiencing of one's entire life from multiple perspectives simultaneously. You feel the pain you caused others. You experience the ripple effects of your actions across generations. You understand the consequences of choices you never realized were significant. Maria Chen, a 34-year-old accountant with no religious background, described it this way after surviving cardiac arrest. I felt everything, not just what I did, but how it affected others, how it changed them. A harsh word I spoke to my daughter when she was 7. I felt her heart break. A time I helped a stranger with directions. I felt how it restored his faith in humanity after a terrible day. Nothing was judged, just understood completely. The third level introduces what experiencers call beings of light, guides who communicate through pure thought rather than words. These beings appear across cultural backgrounds, though they may be interpreted through different religious frameworks. What's consistent is their function. They help the experiencer understand the deeper meaning of their life review. Beyond this third level, accounts become both rarer and more transformative. Those who reach the fourth level describe entering what resembles a mirror corridor of alternate lives, paths not taken, choices not made. They experience who they might have become had they made different decisions. Most troubling is the realization that these alternate selves exist as energy structures in what appears to be a shared field of consciousness. Physicist Dr. James Whittaker, who clinically died for 17 minutes during heart surgery, returned with mathematical equations describing quantum field structures that aligned with this experience, equations that later proved useful in advancing quantum computing. The fifth level involves the collapse of linear time. Experiencers report perceiving past, present, and future simultaneously, not as a sequence but as a unified field. Many return with premonitions that later prove accurate. Some gain insights into historical events they couldn't possibly have known about. Consider the case of Anna Kowalski, an illiterate Polish farmer who, after being revived from drowning in 1994, began drawing detailed astronomical diagrams and describing celestial phenomena that were only confirmed by NASA years later. Before her NDE, she had never shown interest in astronomy. The sixth level is described as a separation of shadow, where the experiencer sheds aspects of identity tied to fear, pride, and pain. Those who reach this level report a profound sense of returning to their essential nature. They describe encountering what some call the source or creator, though they emphasize these terms are inadequate approximations. Very few report reaching the seventh level. Those who do often refuse to describe it, claiming human language cannot contain the experience. Some say attempting to bring this knowledge back into physical form is what causes the most profound transformation, and sometimes the greatest suffering. Dr. Elizabeth Hernandez, a neuropsychiatrist who studied over 2,000 NDE cases, found that people who reached the deeper levels often exhibited measurable changes in brain function after recovery. Their brains showed increased connectivity between regions normally separate, elevated gamma wave activity associated with heightened awareness, and significant changes in the default mode network linked to self-perception. These changes weren't temporary. They persisted for years, accompanied by personality transformations so profound that family members sometimes said it was like living with a different person. Common changes include loss of fear of death, reported by 98% of deep NDE experiencers. Increased empathic ability, sometimes to the point of feeling others' emotions directly. reduced attachment to material possessions, enhanced intuitive abilities, including reported instances of precognition, electrical sensitivity, disrupting electronic equipment, difficulty reintegrating into previous social roles and relationships. These transformations suggest that NDEs aren't just experiences, they're initiations that fundamentally alter consciousness. The quantum revelation. In 2018, a classified research program conducted across 5 international hospitals used advanced brain imaging technology to monitor patients during cardiac arrest. The findings were never officially published, but 3 researchers independently leaked portions of the data. What they discovered changes everything we thought we knew about consciousness. Using specially designed EEG equipment, sensitive enough to detect quantum-level neural activity, they documented something extraordinary. When clinical death occurred and traditional EEG showed flatline, their equipment detected organized information patterns continuing within quantum neural structures. These patterns didn't diminish as oxygen depleted. They amplified. The lead researcher, who remains anonymous, described it as watching consciousness upload itself to another medium. More shocking was what happened next. These information patterns exhibited what physicists call non-local behavior, appearing simultaneously across multiple points in space. The consciousness wasn't disappearing, it was expanding. This aligns precisely with what NDE experiencers have reported for centuries. Not a diminishing of awareness, but an explosion into greater states of consciousness, the 7 levels. One patient in the study, a 42-year-old professor with no spiritual beliefs, was clinically dead for nearly 40 minutes before being revived. Upon recovery, he described in precise detail the quantum imaging equipment used, technical conversations between researchers in another room, and provided mathematical equations describing consciousness transfer that the research team had been attempting to formulate but hadn't yet completed. When asked how this was possible, his answer was simple. Time doesn't work the way you think it does. Neither does consciousness. I experienced every moment simultaneously, including moments your team hasn't experienced yet. The researcher who leaked this information didn't do so for fame or profit. They did it because they believed humanity deserves to know. Consciousness doesn't end at death. It transforms. But perhaps most significant is what multiple experiencers have reported about our current moment in history. Those who reach the 5th level, where time becomes non-linear, consistently return with the same message. Humanity stands at a critical threshold. They describe a collective awakening beginning to occur. People across the world spontaneously accessing higher levels of consciousness that previously required the near-death process to reach. They speak of children being born with natural abilities to perceive these levels, of increasing numbers of people experiencing spontaneous spiritual awakenings, and of a fundamental shift in human consciousness accelerating in our lifetime. This isn't religious prophecy. It's a pattern emerging from thousands of accounts across cultures, socioeconomic backgrounds, and belief systems, suggesting something profound is happening to human consciousness itself, beyond the veil. What do we make of all this? Near-death experiences aren't just glimpses of the afterlife. They're windows into the true nature of consciousness itself. The 7 levels reveal that what we call death is merely a transition from one state of awareness to another, more expanded state. The evidence suggests consciousness isn't produced by the brain, it's channeled through it. The brain acts as a receiver and translator, not a generator. When the physical body dies, consciousness continues its journey through progressively more expansive states of being. This knowledge has been kept from mainstream awareness not because it lacks evidence, but because it fundamentally challenges the materialist paradigm that underpins our economic, scientific, and social structures. If consciousness transcends physical death, then our priorities, values, and understanding of reality require radical reconsideration. The 7 levels aren't just a roadmap of what happens after death. They're a description of the full spectrum of consciousness available to us right now. The experiences reported by those who've crossed the threshold suggest we're accessing only a narrow band of our potential awareness. Whether you view this information through a scientific, spiritual, or philosophical lens, one thing becomes clear: we are more than our physical bodies. Consciousness continues. And understanding this changes everything. Awakening begins. Have you ever experienced moments when reality seemed to shift, when you glimpsed something beyond the physical world? Share your experience in the comments. And if you're ready to explore more forbidden knowledge about human consciousness, watch our next video on children who remember their past lives.